We all know how troop surrenders are supposed to work, right? Even in modern warfare, soldiers get encircled, raise the white flag, and troops from the opposing side take them into custody. No matter the exact format, human beings have always been at the center of that process, until now. Ukraine just deployed something so terrifying on the battlefield that it caused Russian soldiers to give themselves up without a moment's hesitation. This is a world first, marking the most extraordinary troop surrender in contemporary military history. Putin's forces allowed themselves to be taken prisoner not by humans, but by something decidedly non-human. On April 13th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky disclosed something completely unprecedented. For the very first time, Ukraine utilized ground-based robots and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, to seize a Russian position and take the soldiers stationed there into custody. The remarkable part? Not a single Ukrainian infantry soldier was involved. This is an absolutely monumental development for Ukraine. With roughly 2 million Ukrainians currently wanted for evading military mobilization, Ukraine keeps pushing the envelope, finding creative solutions to serious problems that have been a thorn in their side since Putin launched his invasion. People may not want to fight, and that's understandable. Ukraine is constructing robots to do the fighting on their behalf. For the first time in the history of this war, an enemy position was seized exclusively by unmanned platforms, ground systems, and drones. Ukraine's president proudly announced in a statement published on the official website of the Office of the President of Ukraine. The occupiers surrendered, and the entire operation was carried out without infantry and without any losses on our side. This isn't simply about winning individual battles. It's about Ukraine developing technologies specifically engineered to preserve soldiers' lives. And it represents the future of a war in which Putin leans heavily on Russia's overwhelming numerical advantage in manpower to gradually chip away at Ukraine's defenses. But that strategy simply isn't working anymore. Ukraine is reclaiming territory and forcing surrenders by removing human soldiers from the equation entirely. Let's take a moment to imagine ourselves standing in the worn-out boots of a Russian soldier. First, consider yourself fortunate to even have those boots. Many of your fellow soldiers were forced to purchase their own gear as far back as December 2022, because Russia's stockpiles, even of the most basic necessities, have been critically depleted almost from the very day Putin launched his full-scale invasion. Still, here you are, on Ukrainian soil. Somehow, you and a small unit of Russian soldiers have managed to establish a defensive position. You're waiting for reinforcements, more troops and equipment arriving from the rear, though you have absolutely no idea if they're actually on their way. Starlink is down, Telegram is blocked, and you're receiving zero communication from your commanding officers. So you hunker down and pray that Ukrainian forces don't find your location. Those hopes are shattered almost immediately as you pick up the unmistakable buzzing of a drone circling overhead, clearly having pinpointed exactly where you are. You clutch your rifle. Any moment now, you'll have to defend this small patch of stolen Ukrainian territory against the soldiers coming to take it back. Except, that's not what unfolds. The hum of aerial drones grows louder. Kamikaze drones start hammering your position. You peek out, bracing yourself to see human soldiers closing in over the horizon, but that's not what greets you. In the distance, drawing steadily closer, are metallic machines rolling forward on wheels and tracks. You don't even need to fire a single shot to know that small arms fire won't do much against them. Not that you can fire anyway. The moment you poke your head out, an FPV drone comes screaming straight at your face. Then, just as suddenly, it all goes quiet. You look again. An entire contingent of robots, some airborne, others on the ground, stands before you. What choice do you really have? You can die fighting machines, or you can raise the white flag and let them take you in. You're smarter than most. The white flag goes up. And just like that, you and your unit forfeit the territory you'd occupied, handing Ukraine a world first. A moment that signals a brand new strategy Ukraine now appears ready to unleash across the entire front line. But wait, you might be thinking, haven't I heard something like this before? And you'd be absolutely right. On this very channel, we've previously covered footage showing Ukraine using robots to compel Russian soldiers into surrendering. The incident Zelensky is now reporting is actually the culmination of extensive, dedicated work by Ukraine, who had managed to take Russian soldiers prisoner using ground robots and UAVs in isolated incidents prior to this. For instance, back in January, reports surfaced that Ukraine had successfully deployed a drone alongside a TWW 7.62 ground robot equipped with artificial intelligence to capture 3 Russian soldiers as prisoners of war. That claim came directly from the robot's manufacturer, Def Droid, and was backed up by video footage showing Putin's troops surrendering to the ground robot. Forbes also reported on Russian soldiers laying down their arms in the face of Ukraine's robot army. On March 11th, video emerged of soldiers effectively waving the white flag at a drone fitted with a loudspeaker that spelled out, in no uncertain terms, what would happen if they refused to comply. For soldiers took the opportunity to become prisoners in that incident, likely after watching many of their comrades get wiped out by Ukrainian drones just minutes earlier. Even as far back as August 2024, Ukraine had been deploying speaker-equipped drones to coerce a lone Russian soldier into surrendering. In that particular case, the soldier had been abandoned by his own unit, so he was probably quite relieved that the drone he'd assumed was coming to kill him started talking about taking him into custody instead. So yes, the point stands. Surrenders to Ukrainian drones and robots had already happened before. However, the critical distinction between this latest incident and every previous one is where things get truly significant for Ukraine. Every prior surrender had been isolated, never resulting in any meaningful territorial gain. But this most recent event is different. The pivotal difference is that Ukraine didn't just force Russian soldiers to surrender. It also used its drones and ground robots in tandem to physically reclaim the territory those soldiers had been occupying. Zelensky hasn't disclosed the exact location where this land was liberated, though it appears most likely to have taken place somewhere in the south. Ukraine has been mounting a significant counteroffensive in the south since late January, clawing back roughly 480 square kilometers, approximately 185 miles, of its own land. We can now add whatever territory Ukraine's drones and ground robots have just recaptured, all accomplished without a single infantry soldier setting foot on the battlefield. Zelensky was quick to commend several of Ukraine's robotic systems, including the Volia, Termit, Artel, Radel, Protector, and Snake. He didn't specify which, if any, of these particular systems were directly involved in this groundbreaking world first. However, he did shine a light on something else that's truly remarkable. It's not just territory that Ukraine's robots are reclaiming. These machines are actively saving lives on the front lines in real time. According to Zelensky, Ukraine's robotic systems have been involved in an astonishing 22,000 missions over just the last 3 months of the conflict. In every single one of those instances, these robots were tasked with entering the most dangerous areas, protecting human soldiers who would otherwise have had no choice but to put themselves in harm's way. Ukraine's robotic recapture of territory is just one striking example. Rescue operations and logistical missions are also being carried out by Ukraine's ground-based machines, and lives are being saved as a direct result. In other words, in over 22,000 instances, a robot entered the most hazardous zones so that a soldier didn't have to. This is about high technologies in defense of the highest value, human life, Zelensky declared when announcing Ukraine's remarkable achievement. What we're witnessing now is a wholesale transformation of what it means to wage war in Ukraine. Russia was simply not prepared for any of this. When Putin launched his invasion, he genuinely believed that sheer numerical superiority and conventional weaponry would be enough to deliver victory. Even after his initial so-called special military operation collapsed in failure, Putin pivoted to a war of attrition, convinced that Ukraine's military would eventually burn itself out and fade away. As recently as September 2025, the Institute for the Study of War reported that Putin remained firmly convinced Russia would be able to outlast Ukraine, its drone arsenal, and all the Western backing the country had been receiving. Deploying 700,000 Russian soldiers inside Ukraine was supposed to be the key that unlocked final victory. But there's one glaring, critical problem. To win a war of attrition through manpower, you have to be effectively destroying the enemy's soldiers. What Russia now faces is an entirely new category of warfare, one for which it was completely and utterly unprepared. As Zelensky himself puts it, the future is already on the front line, and Ukraine is building it. That future is manifesting itself in ways far more profound than simply capturing soldiers and seizing territory using drones and robots. The rise of the machines is well underway on the Ukrainian battlefield, and Ukraine's robotic advantage is expanding at a pace that Russia simply cannot keep up with. As each month goes by, robots and drones are shouldering an ever greater share of the burden in Ukraine. According to the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's Armed Forces, General Alexander Syrsky, robotic systems carried out a staggering 50% more tasks in March than they had in February, a trajectory that has been climbing steadily ever since Ukraine began effectively integrating ground robots with its UAV fleet. These increases are accompanied by dramatically higher losses inflicted upon Russian forces. Also in April, Syrsky confirmed that Ukraine's UAVs caused 29% more enemy casualties in March than they had the month before. On top of that, frontline robots completed an impressive 9,000 missions for Ukraine during March alone, a massive leap compared to just a few months earlier. For context, back in November 2025, robots were completing fewer than a third of that figure, with numbers hovering around 2,900 missions. None of this is happening by coincidence. It's the product of a highly coordinated national effort to transform robots into genuine frontline warfighters. This is clearly visible in the explosive growth of Ukraine's robotic army. According to Euromaidan Press, 67 Ukrainian military units were deploying ground robots for logistics missions in November 2025. By March, that number had surged to 167. If you're wondering why the number of robot missions more than tripled between those 2 months, there's your answer. Roughly 3 times as many units using robots naturally leads to roughly 3 times as many missions being completed. Ukraine's defense industry is also scaling up at a rapid pace to meet the demands of a strategy that relies more and more heavily on drones and UAVs. Zelensky has stated that Ukraine's UAV manufacturers are now capable of producing millions of aerial strike platforms every single year, a figure that reached up to 4 million annually by the close of 2025. With additional funding from partner nations or through the export of its robotics technology to other countries, production could climb even higher. On the ground robot front, the Interpreter reported at the end of March that Ukraine now has 280 companies entirely dedicated to manufacturing the kinds of robots that played a starring role in this historic world-first event. The machines these companies produce are transporting hundreds of tons of supplies in addition to participating in rescue missions and offensive operations. Some figures within Ukraine's military, like Andriy Bitki, commander of the 3rd Army Corps, believe these robots will reduce Ukraine's frontline infantry requirements by as much as 30% by the end of 2026 alone. Looking further ahead, as many as 80% of the missions that previously require human soldiers could ultimately be handled by UAVs and robots. Something fundamental is also shifting in how Ukraine actually deploys its robots. Historically, ground robots were used almost exclusively for logistics. They were, and continue to be, rugged machines capable of transporting far more supplies than any human could carry. The vast majority of the 9,000 missions completed in March would still have been logistical in nature. However, if the capture of territory and Russian soldiers in April tells us anything, it's that Ukraine is actively working to make its ground robots just as potent an offensive force as they are a logistical one. Foreign policy underscored this significant shift on April 13, noting that one of the most compelling factors driving the large-scale construction and widespread deployment of ground robots is their average unit cost, less than $20,000. To put that figure in perspective, a Ukrainian soldier on the front lines can earn somewhere in the region of $2,500 per month, according to the new Voice of Ukraine. In just 8 months, a ground robot becomes more cost-effective than a single soldier, and that calculation doesn't even factor in the additional expenses of training and equipping a frontline soldier, costs that add thousands more to the annual bill. A ground robot, by contrast, doesn't need food, motivation, clothing, or extensive training. Everything it requires is packaged into that $20,000 price tag, perhaps with a few additional dollars if the robot is outfitted with explosives or a mounted rifle for combat operations. Now, it should be noted that some drawbacks to Ukraine's robot-heavy strategy are beginning to emerge. Russia's electronic warfare, EW, capabilities are certainly among them. Ukraine's robots depend on software, and that software requires frequent updates, often on a monthly basis, to counter the constantly evolving EW tactics Russia employs on the battlefield. And as the kill zones in Ukraine continue to expand, ironically, a consequence of Ukraine's own success, robots and UAVs often require modifications before they can be effectively deployed by frontline units. That second challenge, however, is actually a welcome one. Wider kill zones mean more Russian soldiers are eliminated before they can even get close to Ukraine's frontline defensive positions. Units will likely be more than willing to make a handful of adjustments if it means Putin's forces have to slog through additional miles of drone-infested terrain before they can mount an attack. Despite these challenges, it's abundantly clear that Ukraine's drone and robot advantage over Russia is growing, and we're now seeing the profound consequences ripple across the Ukrainian battlefield and deep inside Russia itself. Ukraine's robotic army is unleashing absolute devastation. Forcing surrenders and seizing territory is merely the tip of an enormous iceberg. Inside Russia, Ukraine has been deploying its long-range drones to devastating effect, systematically targeting Russia's critical oil infrastructure. A series of strikes against Russia's Baltic seaports throughout March and into April resulted in Russia losing access to facilities that handle up to 45% of its oil exports, according to Fortune. In Primorsk alone, one of the two Baltic seaports under attack, Ukraine's drone strikes caused an estimated $200 million worth of stored Russian oil to go up in flames. And that's before accounting for the hundreds of millions of dollars in oil that simply haven't been able to leave that port or the terminal at U.S Teluga as a result of the strikes. Records are also being shattered on the battlefield inside Ukraine itself. The 22,000 missions in 3 months and 9,000 missions in March alone are both new records, and together with the historic surrender event we've been discussing, represent genuine world firsts. On the long-range drone front, Ukraine has also set a new distance record. Zelensky confirmed that the furthest a Ukrainian drone has traveled to reach its target is now 1,750 kilometers, or just over 1,080 miles from Ukraine's border. And there will be more to come. Zelensky has put Russia on notice. Ukraine can now strike deeper into Russian territory than ever before. Automation is also becoming increasingly embedded across Ukraine's entire drone and robot arsenal. Take the Hornet drone as a prime example. On April 14, United 24 Media reported that Ukraine's Hornets, commonly known as FPV drones or loitering munitions, have been equipped with automated targeting systems enabling them to engage and destroy Russian targets with zero input from a human drone operator. Those new platforms join a growing fleet, as Ukraine is currently fielding roughly 30% more strike drones on the front lines than Russia. What we're observing here is a remarkable acceleration that almost appears to have materialized overnight, but it hasn't. For years, Ukraine has been building, experimenting, and refining. It has continuously developed new categories of drones, and its defense industry has grown to the point where it's the envy of countless other nations. 2026 is simply the year when all of that relentless effort is finally bearing fruit, and there is absolutely nothing Russia or Putin can do to stop it. So what does Ukraine's achievement of forcing Russian soldiers into the most bizarre and historic surrender in modern military history actually tell us? The event itself is a landmark moment. We could even argue that it's a blueprint, particularly as Russia increasingly relies on infiltration tactics, sending small infantry units to establish a precarious foothold on Ukrainian territory. The combination of UAVs and ground robots that Ukraine just demonstrated in this infantry-free liberation mission could set the standard for similar operations across the entire front line. Wherever Russia's positions are less than firmly established, and that's true of many of the spots where Putin's infiltrators are creeping forward, Ukraine now has a new operational option. One that eliminates risk to its infantry and has already proven its effectiveness. Russia is staring down the barrel of a drone warfare gun. That gun is cocked, the ammunition is loaded, and it's pointed directly at Putin and his inner circle. Ground robots are roaming the battlefield, capturing soldiers, evacuating Ukrainian troops, delivering critical supplies. UAVs are tearing through Russia's forces at the front, in the kill zones, deep in the rear, and inside Russia itself. Ukraine has more drones, superior technology, sustained international backing, and perhaps most importantly of all, a reason to keep fighting. Russia's soldiers are surrendering to robots because they're trapped in a war they never wanted to be part of. Ukraine's revolutionary approach to modern warfare makes that already unbearable conflict even more nightmarish for the soldiers Putin is throwing to the front lines. As we speak, Russian forces in the Donetsk region are experiencing firsthand just how overwhelming Ukraine's robotic advantage has become. Something is going very wrong for Russia in Donetsk. Casualties are at an all-time high as something tears through Putin's forces in the one region above all others that Russia's president is desperate to capture. Soldiers are dying, territorial gains are non-existent, and behind the wall of propaganda, a brutal reality is unfolding, one you can learn all about by watching our next video. And if you found this video valuable, don't forget to subscribe to BNN, Brief News Network, so you never miss our latest analysis of the most critical developments in the war in Ukraine. Thank you, as always, for watching.